I never expected that one quiet evening at my best friend's house would change everything. I had gone over just to drop off a book I borrowed, thinking it'd be a 10-minute stop. But as soon as I stepped inside, the air felt different, warmer somehow, heavier with an unspoken tension I couldn't name. She was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her hair loosely pinned back, a few strands falling over her face. Mid-40s, graceful in a way that made every movement seem deliberate, every pause meaningful. I froze for a second. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled just slightly, the kind of smile that makes your chest tighten without warning. "Hey," I muttered, shifting the book nervously in my hands. "Don't just stand there," she said, her voice soft but firm, almost teasing. "Come in." Her tone should have been normal, casual, but something about it made my stomach do that awkward flip. I stepped closer, and the faint scent of her perfume hit me. Something subtle, comforting, and yet strangely intoxicating. My brain told me to stop noticing every detail, but my eyes kept drifting. The way her fingers lingered on the counter, the slight crease by her eyes when she smiled, the soft curve of her shoulder as she reached for a glass. We started talking, and it was innocent at first. I made a joke about the book, and she laughed. Not just a laugh, but a full, warm sound that seemed to fill the room. I noticed how she lingered on my words, tilting her head just slightly, listening. I wasn't used to being watched like that, not in this way, not by someone older, someone her. Then she asked about school, my plans, my life in a way that made me feel seen. Really seen in a way no one my age had. Her questions weren't polite, they were curious, probing, gentle. And I found myself saying more than I intended, talking about dreams I hadn't told anyone yet, hoping I didn't sound like an idiot. At some point, the casual hum of the kitchen faded into silence. The soft ticking of the clock, the dim light of the lamp above the sink. It was all quiet, too quiet. I noticed how her hand lingered near mine on the counter, close enough to brush if I reached, though I didn't. I wanted to, but I didn't know if I could. She tilted her head and looked at me, her eyes holding mine longer than necessary. My heart started racing in a way I couldn't control, and I felt my fingers tighten around the book like a lifeline. "Don't leave yet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow commanding. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. She didn't explain, didn't move. She just waited, her gaze fixed on me. The corners of her lips curved in that small, knowing smile again. My mind scrambled. Was this really happening? Was I imagining it? But every instinct in me told me it wasn't imagination, that something dangerous, thrilling, and utterly forbidden was just starting. I wanted to step closer. I wanted to run. I wanted to stay forever. And before I could decide, the sound of the doorbell cut through the tension like a knife, making both of us start slightly. She glanced toward the entrance, then back at me, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. Warning? Curiosity? Anticipation? And in that frozen moment, I realized nothing would ever be the same. The doorbell's chime still echoed faintly when I realized neither of us had moved. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, my hand still clutching the book like it was a lifeline. She finally turned toward the entrance, her eyes narrowing slightly, a subtle tension in her jaw. "Probably just Mark," she said softly, as if reading my thoughts. Mark, my best friend, her son. That simple reminder sent a jolt of guilt through me. My brain screamed at me to step back, to act normal, but every fiber of me wanted to stay, to linger in the moment I shouldn't be in. As she disappeared toward the door, I allowed myself a quiet breath, but I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she had looked at me, the way her presence seemed to pull me in despite every warning flashing in my mind. I thought about my past, about how I'd been drifting from one casual relationship to another, none of them leaving any mark, none of them making me feel alive like this. I'd never had someone look at me and make me feel important without asking anything in return. And I could tell, just from the way she listened, that she had been carrying her own solitude, her own regrets, probably a dozen quiet nights thinking about what could have been, about choices that left her wishing for something more. She returned a few moments later, brushing imaginary lint from her sweater, her eyes catching mine again. "Everything okay?" she asked, but her voice carried a softness that seemed to invite honesty. I wanted to tell her everything, the rush of feelings, the guilt, the longing, but I just nodded. Words always felt like betrayal in moments like these. She sighed and leaned back against the counter again. "It's strange, isn't it?" she murmured, almost to herself. "How life puts people in front of you at the wrong time." I froze. That almost whispered admission, the slight quiver in her voice. It was a crack in her armor. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to close the gap that both of us were pretending didn't exist. But my own doubts held me back. The age difference, the fact that she was my best friend's mom, the moral lines that society would frown upon. Every rational thought said to leave, but my heart refused. "You've changed a lot since high school," she said suddenly, her tone teasing but tinged with something deeper. "Not that I expected you to stay the same." I smiled awkwardly, feeling the tension tighten. "I guess I'm still figuring things out," I admitted, though the words felt fragile, unfinished. For a long beat, we just stood there, the air between us heavy with things neither of us wanted to name. I noticed how her fingers brushed the edge of the counter, close enough to almost touch mine, the electricity of that near contact making me acutely aware of every heartbeat. I swallowed, trying to steady myself, but the pull toward her was magnetic. And then, in that quiet kitchen, our eyes met again, lingering a fraction too long. No words were spoken, but the tension shifted. Something unspoken passed between us, an acknowledgement of the risk, the desire, the impossible. A quiet understanding that neither of us could walk away, not completely, not yet. I couldn't stop replaying that evening in my head, the way she had said, almost whispering, "Don't leave yet." Every word had lingered like smoke, curling around my thoughts, refusing to dissipate. I told myself it was wrong, that I needed to leave, that this was her son's house, that boundaries existed for a reason. Yet somehow I found myself there again the very next afternoon, pretending to return a jacket I had forgotten. Even though I had no real excuse. She was in the living room this time, reading, the sunlight spilling across her hair in golden streaks. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, and it hit me, again, that I was completely unprepared to act normal around her. The familiarity of her smile was intoxicating, dangerous. My chest tightened without warning, and I realized I had memorized the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed. "Back so soon?" she asked lightly, but there was something else in her tone. A softness, a caution, a hint that she knew the effect she had on me. "Forgot this?" I mumbled, holding up the jacket, pretending it was just a prop for this casual encounter. She tilted her head, studying me. "You've been thinking about that night, haven't you?" Her voice was gentle, but there was no mistaking the piercing accuracy behind the question. I swallowed, words catching in my throat. "Maybe," I admitted almost reluctantly. She smiled faintly, but then her expression shifted, the brief warmth replaced by a flicker of caution, something I hadn't noticed before. "We can't. I mean," her voice trailed, unfinished, leaving the air thick. We both knew. There was no need to spell it out, not really. The unspoken words, about my age, about her past, about the world watching, about her son, hung like a barrier neither of us could cross. Then, in a moment that should have felt calm, it became anything but. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Mark. "Hey, is my mom around? Want to swing by?" My stomach dropped. I felt caught, trapped between desire and consequence. I tried to mask the panic, to act like it was nothing, but she noticed immediately. She glanced at my phone, then back at me, her lips pressing together. There was a flicker of fear in her eyes, fear of being caught, fear of being exposed, but also that same strange pull I felt, that inexplicable magnetic tug. "Stay," she whispered suddenly, and it wasn't a suggestion. It was a plea. I hesitated. My rational side screamed to leave, to disappear before Mark arrived. But the moment I looked at her, leaning slightly toward me, that old pull came rushing back. My hand twitched, almost brushing hers, and I stopped myself, but barely. Before I could think, the door swung open. My roommate, Jason, was standing there with an easy grin, holding a bag of groceries. "Hey, I thought I dropped these off." "Oh." His eyes widened slightly as he took in the scene. The tension was so thick, so obvious, it practically hummed between us. I felt heat crawl up my neck, my palms sweaty, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hey, Jason," I said, trying to force casualness into my voice. Fancy seeing you here." He didn't look convinced. He dropped the groceries on the counter, and I caught the subtle glance he threw her way. A protective sort of look, but tinged with curiosity, suspicion. My chest tightened further. After a few awkward seconds, he muttered something about leaving the groceries and heading back. But even as he closed the door, the silence between us became unbearable. The sound of the lock clicking echoed like a drumbeat, pulling us closer even as the world told us we shouldn't. We both knew it could only take one moment, one accidental touch, one unguarded glance, one step too close, for everything to spiral. And despite the warnings in my head, I felt drawn in, helpless against the gravity of her presence. She shifted slightly, her knee brushing mine as she reached for her teacup. Neither of us moved away, neither of us commented, but the almost imperceptible contact was enough. It sparked a current neither of us wanted, neither of us would admit aloud. My hand itched to reach for hers. Hers hovered near mine as if daring me, tempting me. "Why is this so complicated?" I whispered, almost to myself, but she heard. She tilted her head, her eyes locking onto mine. "Because it shouldn't happen," she replied softly, her voice betraying a tremor I couldn't ignore. "But it does." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. No words, no gestures, just the quiet hum of the kitchen, the lingering scent of her perfume, the unspoken acknowledgement that boundaries existed only to be tested. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to remind us of the stakes, a sudden creak of the stairs, Mark's unmistakable voice calling down, shattered the fragile bubble around us. I froze. She froze. And in that single suspended moment, our eyes met again, charged with everything we weren't supposed to feel, everything we wanted but couldn't have. The next move, who would step back, who would step closer, was entirely uncertain. The house had grown quiet again, but the air between us was electric, charged with a tension that neither of us could ignore. Mark's footsteps had faded, leaving only the sound of our own breathing and the subtle creak of the old floorboards beneath our feet. I could feel it, her presence so close it was almost suffocating, her perfume wrapping around me like a warning and a temptation at the same time. I wanted to step closer, to close the gap that had been pulling me in since the first evening, but every rational thought told me to stop. She was my best friend's mom. She was older, experienced, untouchable in every sense that mattered. And yet I couldn't stop staring. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, one foot tapping ever so slightly. Her gaze, calm but intense, met mine, and I felt a strange vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. A crack in the armor she always wore. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, her voice low, almost teasing, but trembling slightly at the edges. I don't know," I admitted, my own voice catching. I wanted to say more, to spill the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. My chest was tight, my heart hammering in a rhythm I couldn't control. I can't stop thinking about you." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something raw passing through them. Fear? Longing? Guilt? Couldn't tell. But she didn't move away, didn't deny it. She just stared, and in that silence, my world narrowed to the space between us. Then she laughed softly, almost bitterly, shaking her head. "You have no idea how dangerous this is," she whispered. "For both of us." "I don't care," I said before I could think better of it. The words slipped out with more conviction than I expected. "I can't stop caring. And I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I do." Her hand twitched slightly at her side, the movement so small I almost didn't notice it, but I did. My fingers itched to reach for hers, to bridge the distance, to feel that forbidden connection. A sudden flash of jealousy, sharp and painful, pierced me. I imagined her with someone else, her laughter filling another man's kitchen, her hands brushing someone else's. My chest ached. I wanted to yell, to grab her, to tell her she couldn't look at anyone else like she looked at me. But instead, I just stepped a fraction closer, letting the tension between us stretch unbearably. Her gaze followed my movement, and I saw something shift, something unspoken, vulnerable. "You're reckless," she said, though her lips curved slightly, betraying her own desire. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice low, urgent. "Not until you—" The words caught in my throat. I froze, the air thick around us. Her eyes softened, her breath catching slightly. We were inches apart now. I could feel the heat radiating off her body, smell her faint, lingering perfume, hear the faint pulse of her heartbeat in the quiet room. Neither of us moved, yet neither of us could step back. And then the world seemed to pause, everything else vanished. One wrong move could shatter this fragile moment. One word could destroy it. And yet, neither of us wanted to break the spell. I leaned slightly closer, daring to close the distance, and in that suspended breath, I realized this could be the moment that changed everything. And then, the silence between us was unbearable, thick with everything we hadn't said, everything we wanted but couldn't admit. I had inched closer, caught in the gravity of her presence, feeling her warmth brush against me, and for a moment, the world had narrowed to nothing but the space between us. Then, without warning, the sound of a phone vibrating on the counter shattered the tension. She jumped slightly, glancing at it, and I noticed the screen light up with a message preview. "Mom, are you home alone? I need to talk." Mark, my chest sank. Mark, her son, my best friend. The one boundary we'd been silently skirting, the invisible line we hadn't crossed, now threatened to explode. Her eyes met mine, panic flickering in their depths. He shouldn't know," she whispered, voice trembling, almost breaking. "I didn't expect him to." I reached out instinctively, wanting to reassure her, but my hand froze in midair. This wasn't just a near miss anymore. The stakes had shifted. One wrong move, one overheard conversation, and everything we'd been building, everything raw, forbidden, intoxicating, could collapse. I could see her struggle with herself, the guilt pressing down, heavy in her posture, in the tight line of her jaw. "I didn't mean for this, for any of this," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I swallowed hard. "Neither did I," said quietly, though the words felt hollow. My mind raced. We'd been caught in a private bubble of desire, tension, and unspoken confessions. And now reality slammed back in, cold and unforgiving. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly, and I saw her pause before answering. I couldn't hear Mark's voice, but I could see the subtle flicker of her expressions. Concern, hesitation, and then something sharper, something like fear. Her eyes darted to mine, guilt warring with longing, and in that instant, I realized how fragile everything was. Every whispered word, every lingering look, every brush of our hands. All of it could unravel in seconds. And yet, I couldn't pull away. I couldn't leave. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head, her voice cracking under the weight of unspoken feelings. "I can't do this. Not like this. Not with him." I wanted to argue, to tell her it didn't matter, that I could handle it, that we could find a way, but I stayed silent. Because I understood. This wasn't just about us. It was about consequences, about morality, about the people who could be hurt if we let this spiral further. And then, just as I thought the worst had passed, her phone buzzed again. This time with a photo that froze me in place, my heart lurching painfully. It wasn't just a message. It was Mark, standing outside her window earlier that evening, completely unaware of what he'd captured. The almost kiss, the tension, the closeness that should never have existed. She gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand, eyes wide. "Oh no," she whispered. I felt my stomach twist. We were no longer in our private world. Someone had seen everything. everything we'd tried to keep secret. And just like that, the forbidden tension, the desire, the pull between us, it became a dangerous fire. One small spark could ignite heartbreak, betrayal, and choices we might never recover from. Her gaze met mine again, urgent, panicked, but still, impossibly longing. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I knew one thing. Nothing could ever be the same. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on us. Her phone lay between us on the counter, the last message still glowing, a reminder of everything that could go wrong. Yet somehow, nothing else mattered in that moment except the weight of her eyes on mine. "I can't do this anymore," she said suddenly, voice low but firm, trembling slightly. "I can't pretend I'm not feeling this, and I can't ignore it. Not with him. Not with you." My heart skipped. I wanted to argue, to back away, to tell her it was too dangerous, but I couldn't. The truth was, I had been trying to fight this since the first evening I walked into her kitchen. I had tried to rationalize, to respect boundaries, to be careful. But every instinct, every heartbeat, every glance told me she was where I belonged, even if the world said otherwise. "I don't care about the risks," I whispered, stepping closer. "I can't. I don't want to pretend. Not anymore." Her breath caught, and she closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them again, there was a raw honesty in her gaze that made my chest ache. She wasn't hiding anything. Not fear, not longing, not regret. Everything was there, unfiltered, exposed. "I've waited so long," she murmured, almost to herself, almost a confession I wasn't meant to hear. I didn't think anyone could make me feel seen again. Not like this." And in that moment, the last barrier crumbled. I reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand in mine. The warmth of her skin, the faint tremble under my fingers, made the world shrink even further. She leaned in, ever so slightly, and I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. Everything was dangerous, everything was wrong, and yet nothing had ever felt more right. We stopped, inches apart, and just breathed, the silence between us full of everything words could never capture. Longing, guilt, desire, fear, and an inexplicable sense of belonging. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered, her lips barely brushing my ear, sending shivers down my spine. "But I can't stay away." I swallowed hard, aware of the consequences waiting outside this door, of Mark, of the judgments and boundaries. Yet I didn't pull back. "Neither can I admitted, voice low, sincere. For a long moment, we just stood there, hand in hand, eyes locked, hearts pounding. We hadn't crossed the final line yet, hadn't kissed, hadn't declared everything aloud, but we didn't need to. The understanding was already there, raw and undeniable. And then, without warning, a distant sound. The creak of the front gate, the faint rumble of a car pulling up, reminded us of the world beyond this kitchen. Our bubble of safety, secrecy, and longing was fragile, temporary. She squeezed my hand once, tightly, and whispered, "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." I nodded, feeling the weight of every unspoken word between us. There were still boundaries, still risks, still the world waiting outside. But in that moment, it didn't matter. We understood each other now, fully and painfully, in a way that couldn't be undone. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could survive even the impossible. The days that followed felt unreal, as if we were navigating a world that existed only for the two of us. Every glance, every touch, every small conversation carried a weight we couldn't ignore. Yet somehow, in the quiet chaos, we found a rhythm. A fragile, beautiful rhythm that belonged only to us. We didn't rush. We didn't announce anything. Each stolen moment, each lingering look, felt more honest than any declaration could have been. I learned about the depths of her past, regrets she'd carried for years, sacrifices no one had acknowledged. She learned about my own insecurities, my restless longing for something real, something unshakable. And in those exchanges, something extraordinary happened. Trust. Pure, messy, human trust. Mark's occasional presence was a shadow we couldn't ignore. We were careful, respectful, but the unspoken knowledge between us made every encounter charged, alive with a quiet tension. It wasn't perfect, it couldn't be, but it was ours. One evening, we found ourselves alone on the porch, the sky painted in bruised purples and golds. The air was cool, filled with the faint scent of rain from earlier. I reached for her hand, and she let me, holding on a moment longer than necessary. "I never imagined this," she murmured softly. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with something I'd been chasing from the first night. Hope. "Neither did I," I admitted, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "But I don't want to imagine it. I want to live it." Her laugh was quiet, shaky, but full of warmth. "It feels impossible," she whispered, "but also inevitable." I smiled, feeling my heart swell. That's when I realized something crucial. Love isn't about logic, timing, or convenience. It's about finding someone who makes the impossible feel worth it, who makes every risk seem necessary. We didn't need a dramatic moment, a perfect ending, or a grand gesture. Just this, the understanding, the closeness, the shared silence that spoke volumes. And as the sky darkened, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known I was missing. An acceptance that some connections, no matter how complicated or forbidden, were meant to endure. We still had challenges ahead, judgments, questions, life itself, but we faced them together now, no longer afraid of what could happen. Because sometimes the greatest courage is simply choosing someone, even when the world says you shouldn't. As we leaned against each other, hands intertwined, I knew we had found something rare and human. A love that was flawed, real, and unstoppable. The story wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that somehow was enough. C8